additive was, has a lot of different applications, and really what we wanted to, what you want to show them to say, yes, we are doing additive. Kind of, it looked just like normal production, and it wasn't exciting, and it wasn't this flashy thing that was going on. But therein lies that case that, hey, we are doing additive. When you can look at it and you can say we are doing additive manufacturing, they shouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Welcome to the Additive Advantage podcast, where we cut through the BS to talk about what it really takes to turn additive manufacturing into real business results. I'm Sean Anderson, joined by my co-host Annie Mason. Together, we bring decades of experience in technology and additive manufacturing, and we explore how organizations are moving from pilot projects to scalable, performance-driven capabilities with additive. Let's get started.
On the Additive Advantage, we talk a lot about why additive manufacturing succeeds or fails in the real world, and why the answer is almost never the printer itself. Today's guest brings one of the cleanest inside-out perspectives on that problem. Paul Chabala started his career in product development, but additive pulled him into manufacturing when his organization needed to move from experimentation to production without an internal playbook for how to do that. At Crown Equipment, he spent years building additive as an operational capability, navigating the real constraints that don't show up in slide decks: leadership buy-in, skills gaps, resourcing trade-offs, and risk. Today, Paul works on the solution side at Ricoh USA, helping companies adopt and scale additive through managed services, applying the hard lessons he learned the first time around. This conversation wasn't about machines. It was about what has to change inside an organization for additive to actually work, and why, when it finally does, it looks a lot more boring than people expect. That inside-out journey is exactly what we're going to unpack today. Welcome, Paul. I appreciate you joining us today on the Additive Advantage. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Paul Chabala, I'm the senior manager for Ricoh's managed 3D printing services, specifically our additive manufacturing center of excellence. It's located in Raleigh. I'm currently working with Ricoh to build a network of managed service sites for customers, production facilities, and such that are designed to help the customers accelerate product development, optimize 3D printing processes, and moved into some more advanced manufacturing applications.
That's wonderful. And, as we shared, you have a pretty unique background transitioning from Crown Equipment on the internal side over to Ricoh in terms of these managed services. And where I want to start is you began your career in product development, but additive pulled you into the manufacturing space. What was happening inside that organization, inside Crown Equipment at the time, that made that shift necessary?
Yeah, so you're correct. I started in product development way back when, and I was utilizing 3D printing at a very early stage with 3D printing back in the early days of it, and eventually did move to work with Crown Equipment Corporation on the product development side of things. And in that role, when I was joining with product development, I also had the privilege to manage and have oversight of the model shops and the advanced prototyping shops with Crown Equipment. So in that role, I was able to bring 3D printing and introduce 3D printing into the processes, mostly for the product development and the rapid prototyping side of things, and for the design development and our R&D and those aspects of it. But this being around the 2013 timeframe, we started to really identify additive manufacturing as a future production operation, as the rest of the industry was also identifying that. I had that communication with senior leadership at Crown Equipment Corporation, and was able to convince them that this was something that they would have to start looking at and starting to invest in the future. And that's really where my journey started, in moving from the product development side of 3D printing utilization and moving into the manufacturing side of 3D printing utilization, and had a significant transition over into the advanced manufacturing group at that point in time.
I think a lot of times too, people think R&D, product development, there's such a high appetite for additive. It's a no-brainer buy-in, and manufacturing might be a harder sell. But talk to us a little bit about maybe any surprises you had in terms of getting this capability throughout the organization and getting that buy-in from different departments.
Yes. So buy-in was difficult. And when we talk about buy-in and really where the surprises were that were involved with it, on the product development side in that role, there was no resistance to the utilization of 3D printing for rapid iteration, product development, anything that would go along with that. The early resistance was really from the manufacturing side because 3D printing didn't really fit nicely into the manufacturing paradigms and did not have the necessary structure around it, the rigor that's involved on the manufacturing side, of repeatability of the processes and such. The gates that are followed through the production processes weren't really defined for 3D printing at that time to be the true additive manufacturing process that it should be. So there was resistance that happened on the manufacturing side, just from the concept of really trying to transition 3D printing from the product development side over to a potential production process. Interestingly enough, though, there still was resistance that happened on the product development side as we started to move more towards productization and end use parts that were 3D printed and produced. That's where the resistance really came into play from the product development side, because they weren't ready to really initiate the DFAM applications that were involved with it. And I would say that they weren't ready from a risk standpoint, and they really weren't ready from the actual conceptualization point of it as well.
When you think about trying to foster that capability inside this DFAM conceptualization, I'll call it, why use additive here, where to use additive, how did you think about how to fill that role? Could it be filled from the existing manufacturing design talent pool? Was it a different type of person you needed that fit that role? And if so, why was that so hard maybe to source internally? And how did you think about filling that capability?
So really, interestingly enough, I wasn't the one making the decision to fill the position. I was the one who was trying to convince them that they needed the position. Really, at that point in time, it's a little bit of a different perspective. I think that one of the biggest things that I was trying at that point in time was to convince them that they needed somebody that was a translator, somebody that was going to be able to, speak fluently of the DFAM processes and the whys that are behind it, why you would move towards designing for an additive solution, but really still have some of that knowledge base that was around the actual production applications. So in oversight of some of the model shops and a lot of the machining centers and the rapid development centers and the R&D centers, I really did have an understanding for what it meant operationally to keep machines running, to follow schedules, to have maintenance involved with it, quality systems that were involved with it. So the idea is that there really needed to be this position who was able to be that transition between the two worlds and bring those two worlds together. Because traditionally those worlds, even though there are handshakes that are involved with that through the design to product process, they can still be very siloed. And really, you needed to be able to exist on both sides of the wall there. And that was the unique position that was really necessary in order to move that forward.
I think that so many listeners can relate to needing that translational capability inside their organization. What would you say was the pitch that let leadership understand the need for that. A lot of folks on here are looking for those practical, tactical takeaways that they can go then convince their leadership team of the necessity of this position. What made that pitch really land with that executive audience?
So first and foremost was to give efficacy to 3D printing as a production process, additive manufacturing. So that was an important part to uh, and a very tricky part to do with executive leadership. What we were trying to do at the time, myself, was trying to educate them at the same time that we were trying to have the discussions. So I was always the approach to anytime we were sitting down or any communications that were going on with senior leadership, executive leadership, decision makers, the people that have the, the checkbooks in order to write the funding, was really always start out with a little bit of education portion of it so that there's understanding of it before going in and giving some type of a pitch. It's like, let me teach you about what I'm trying to talk to you about first. And now let's cover it. And, once we get some buy-in there, then let's have the discussion. Really, the pitch was first about learning, and then it was about starting to drive for that idea of having curiosity and keeping that openness to the possibilities of the system, finality, which is something that executive leadership can easily identify as something that is a benefit to manufacturing and the design groups and the enterprise as a whole, and then really trying to show some type of governance and not trying to say that this is a wispy idea that we're asking you to put a lot of front-end funding into and deal with a lot of risk. Um, Try to paint it as something that can be governed and can have good outcomes. And again, it's trying to create the efficacy behind it.
I think that's such fantastic points, helping them understand the strategic potential of additive in both areas of this organization. And I love your point about governance as well. Like, we are going to de-risk this bet. Was there any consideration when you were helping educate the organization that it's not just a technical, where should I apply additive? What is a good part design for that? How do I need to tweak that via DFAM? What about the financial implications? This would be a good part because of X dollars and cents, whether cost savings, faster time to market, etc. Did you have to have translational capability not only between product development and manufacturing, but maybe even financial and technical?
Yes. So I think that's one thing when you start talking about the financial aspect of it, and you're really, they tend to deal with the traditional ROIs that were involved with it, and those are in place, and there's a reason why they use those KPIs and in order to direct their activities and where funding goes. Start to bring in these different ideas. Obviously, the ROIs were different, and that's something that we still have problems with today. Is those ROIs, those tricky ROIs, and how do you get that? So that is, I don't think it's something that's been completely solved today. But even from back at the early times and just ongoing is really trying to show what are those different terms of and trying to reframe the ROIs, but always keeping it at more of an enterprise level. So if you're only benefiting departmental level applications of it, although that is very good, and we do want to do that because cost savings, time savings, everything that, better quality, everything that goes on at the departmental level always rolls itself up. But you really have to take that next step if you're wanting to make it an enterprise solution to show how that infiltrates across all of the different departments and show the path of how that goes up to an enterprise solution. And I think that that's really the critical area, is not to settle on these individual ROIs that may be non-traditional, but really try to emphasize them and play to how that builds up to those executive level decision makers.
That's so critical. In our last conversation we had on a prior podcast episode, That is exactly what we talked about. It has to hit the P&L, not just your departmental priorities. How does it fit into the strategic 5-year plan of your company, and being able to tie it back in language that that executive team can understand and resonates with them and helps them achieve their own priorities is key to enterprise adoption. I think you also brought up something really important, that that enterprise level thinking, it's financial, but it's also people. So you identified this need for translation cross departmentally, and you were able to get leadership buy in terms of additive being a capability. I want to talk a little bit about what that looked like moving from the why and the what to the how, where you had talked a little bit when we were prepping for this around, I'll call it a parallel design system, where you're having to both educate these folks at the same time that you are standing up those capabilities. And sometimes that means you have a whole separate team that's doing this. Can you talk a little bit about how you helped build that skill capability, and maybe what that says about how organizations actually adopt new technologies?
Certainly. Absolutely. I love that you use that term paralleling, because that was very critical. I think that in kind of developing that process really stems from having that type of personality that refuses to give in, because it's you start out from not getting buy-in from anyone. There's a lot of excitement around it, but it's getting that buy-in is tricky. And so by following that mentality that we're not going to give up on this, we're going to drive it forward. It really created what I called the shadow lane, which is it's that path forward, but it's just off the path, and it's going to get you where you need to go, but it tends to fly under the radar and really, kind of not just be disruptive and too much in sight. Uh, that lane, that shadow lane, still has to have everything involved with it. You still have to hit, milestones along that path. You still have to allow the DFAM to mature, but you also have to have on that path, you have to have some process ownership. You're stealing a little bit of ownership from a lot of different departments that are involved with it. And unfortunately, you're not going to get the level of commitment that's necessary in order to sustain it completely. But you want to try to keep it just enough to really keep the momentum moving forward along that path. So it's it operates kind of outside of the critical path until the capability proves itself, and then that parallel path, that shadow lane, can then merge, and that's what you're looking for.
You just dropped so many nuggets of wisdom there. I love this about get buy-in, then don't give in. This process ownership and aggregate, this shadow lane until the capability proves itself, and then they can merge. I think those are immediate adoption keys that anyone can go and implement. And it speaks to sometimes the root cause isn't the technology, and sometimes the failure pattern isn't necessarily anything to do with your tech stack. I want to spend some time here too, because I think in the beginning you talk about this gap between executive level and kind of what it takes to build that system bottom up. So when companies say we're doing additive, talk a little bit about what that usually means in reality versus what leadership thinks is happening. And similar to your shadow lane of capability merging with full capability, what does that look like in the vertical direction with what leadership thinks is happening after initial excitement and what's actually going on, and how you close that?
Yeah. So leadership, when they say, we're doing additive, um, you know, God, it's so easy to throw the executive level under the bus, from the outside looking in. But, at the time, you really have to, bite your lip. We're doing additive meant we're running 3D printers, which was, on the product development side and rapid prototyping. And, there was always, as we were, had the systems running, it was one of those flashy things that they would love to bring, people through on the tours. Always want to stop by the 3D printing lab and see the printers operating and saying, quote unquote, see, we're doing additive. And that was really not the case. Additive was, has a lot of different applications. And really what we wanted is, well, what you want to show them to say, yes, we are doing additive, kind of, it looked just like normal production. And it wasn't exciting, and it wasn't this flashy thing that was going on. But therein lies that case that, hey, we are doing additive. When you can look at it and you can say we are doing additive manufacturing, they shouldn't be able to tell the difference, from the layman's view between. I was like, okay, well, I see stamping, I see, some machining, I see all these, you've got some injection molding going on. I see these plants and everything is just going on, and they're following schedules, and I see the Gemba board up there running, and people are scurrying about, handling the machines, moving parts here to there. When they look at those traditional sites and then they look at the 3D production aspect of it, the additive manufacturing, they should see the same thing. And that in there lies when you want them to be able to say, quote unquote, we are doing additive manufacturing as they're going along their tour, is to say, yes, I see that. That is traditional. That is manufacturing, although be it with a new technology being used. And they can make that they can associate that with the traditional.
I think that I love that. And at the risk of potentially offending manufacturers, of which I am one, I love this idea of going from bold to boring. That's how you know you made it. It's not some shiny new PR tactic. What it is it looks exactly the same. And I think that is so often lost in this conversation because you do have innovation coming out all the time and people are trying to do moonshots. But if you really want to be doing additive manufacturing, you're just doing manufacturing. And I love that point because I think it's lost in a lot of the conversations. And I talk to hundreds of companies, and that is what they want to get to, right? They're just saying, how can I do this better? Not how can I throw out the playbook and put in 3D printing and hope it works. So that's super
Yeah.
solid point. And I think it's a great transition point. So you've learned all of these lessons the hard way, like we all have, trying to implement this inside our organizations. When you go from, I'll call it inside an enterprise, and now you're transitioning to the solution side where you need to go equip other companies, hopefully to not learn all these hard lessons themselves. What maybe surprised you or didn't the most about taking those lessons you've learned and applying them in different contexts?
So, yeah, that was one of the great reasons that, transitioning from Crown Equipment Corporation to Ricoh was this concept of what Ricoh was trying to bring to bear. I tell you what, I get great pleasure in it from day to day, going back to saying, boy, if I could have only done this, and here's my lessons learned. If it only went this way, if I only had that, to now being in a position to say, hey, what if I took all of those lessons learned, I put it together in a package, and then I offered it? So yes, I love being able to look at it from the outside looking in. So some of the biggest surprises that I had from moving from internal enterprise solutioning to being a provider, it was really the different risk levels that are associated with it, and time budgets, and how important that is, and how important it is to create a solution for that, because that's that executive buy-in. That's what they're looking at. We're going to be investing capital, X amount of dollars into this, to facilities upgrades and necessary in order to support the additive, production, skilling up, everything that's going along with this, which is going to be this great investment. And well, what is our risk in doing that? And that's something that even in today's world is still very unclear. So from the perspective I have now, it's like, well, what if we took away the capital expenditure, that CapEx, monster that's sitting on your shoulder, and really kind of replace that with OpEx. And when you talk about that, is having that, the having an operational solution involved with it, instead of trying to stand up this scaffold, this internal scaffolding, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well, that's a whole different story. Yeah, I see that transition when you say, oh, no more CapEx, let's talk OpEx. These whole different personas, are all of a sudden at the table, willing to discuss and say, oh yeah, well, yeah, we can do that. So So I think that that was a surprise to me going from the internal to that external player and seeing that transition.
Yeah, I love that. It reframes a couple things. There's plenty of conversation around cost and ROI, but the key metric you're pointing out is what is my time to value? And sometimes that doesn't make it in the slide deck, but it's actually the most important thing when you're trying to measure and de risk certain initiatives. The other thing I love that you said is how can I make this an operational solution? That's not just a CapEx versus OpEx conversation. Making it an operational solution, I think actually translates that more into a capability because we talk a lot around here. You need people, tech, and business. And if all you're having is a CapEx conversation, you're just talking about procuring equipment. You're not
Yes.
talking about changing your workforce and understanding what are my implications upstream and downstream if I do this, and how can I holistically look at what I'm trying to do versus bring in some printers and hope that I can find the right application after I've done that. And I think that's so critical. One of the things I would love your perspective on is if you asked yourself, because you did, moving from Crown into Ricoh and helping these organizations, what would I need to succeed faster? Is there any answers that come up most clearly in that?
So yes, I think that there's one thing is just to kind of have a better idea heading into it. Doing a little bit of homework ahead of time is going to get you a lot farther. Really kind of tempering the expectations as well. Sometimes we heading into this whole idea to say, hey, we are going to make this concerted effort to either transition into additive manufacturing or take our current applications and scale that up into additive manufacturing, or even, hey, we are actually doing additive manufacturing, but now we want to scale. And now we want to take that and we want to go a little bit further. I think sometimes there can be too much focus or narrow focus that is placed on that and not an openness to change your current applications and processes. First of all, in all three senses of that, there may be new tech, there may be a shift in tech, materials applications, anything that would go along with it to say, hey, it may solve at this level of maturity, but it's not going to solve my next level of maturity. So we have to be open to that kind of transition, and I call it, being nimble, being able to make those shifts. But also when you're looking at also having governance over that, though, say, hey, we can't just make some type of uneducated transition. We need to say, okay, we can be open to this type of transition and how we are going to scale up or how we are going to start into additive. But let's put some structure around this. Let's talk some serious applications and governance around this. Who's going to be our ownership of this? Are the people in place in order to govern this? Are the systems in place in order to govern this? Do we have quality control with it? Do we have a maintenance application that's going to be involved with the scale up of adding these many 3D printers into the process? How are we going to communicate with our ERP? What are all these tie-ins that have to happen? And as you either enter into additive manufacturing, transition current 3D printing into additive manufacturing, or scale up, it's all of those applications and of all of those. And I love what you said. It's not the tech. Okay. There are fantastic 3D printing systems out there. There's great materials applications out there. And if you just make it about the tech itself and the just the capability of that technology, you're not going to succeed. Work on the governance that surrounds that tech, and that's where you'll get some success.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point where this is not a one-time sale, so to speak. As you bring up, hey, as you shift in the maturity models, you need to be able to have that same conversation, but at a different level. So maybe it's not about what are the ideal applications, but to your point, it's now, do we have a plan to integrate into our MES and ERP system so this can really scale? What does that look like? Do we need to think about organizational capacity differently? And I think that's something that can get missed is, well, I did this once and I got leadership and R&D and product development and manufacturing buy-in. Wash my hands of it and let's rock and roll. And you're saying, no, actually, you need to revisit that every time you're making this step leap in function. How do you think about what is a managed service can take some of that on and help people usher through that? But how can people continue to have that leadership conversation internally alongside what you're offering so that they're getting buy-in probably from different stakeholders than they did the first time they launched this initiative? What does that look like for someone trying to chart those increasingly high levels of maturity inside their organization as they scale up additive?
So I think one thing is to look at that enterprise when you're talking about that enterprise level. Kind of think of the portfolio of ROI, okay, and then target those who are involved with those. So what is that? The time to capability or time to market, portion of it. Who owns that? And make sure that we're continuously revisiting that to say, and your point is absolutely is correct. Is like, hey, we had some success, and yay us, we're doing great. But are you missing? Is there still a gap that you're not identifying there? Can you reduce that even more? Make sure that you're continuously feeding that. I think that that's really important. The whole production and logistics and supply chain shift that's involved with it, spare parts on demand and avoidance of tooling and such like that. So there's all these next level discussions that still have to be made and really to identify, well, what's the next level of solution that we need to move towards. And interestingly enough, I think it's the additive manufacturing community as a whole that's a victim of our own success. Our timelines are reduced, our iteration cycles are exponentially faster, and we're just doing all of this. And so that re-identification of your business process has to match those accelerated timelines and everything that goes along with it, to where it used to be, I always laugh when anybody brings up the 7-5-3-year plan anymore. I'm like, 7-5-3-year plan. I'm like, that's like 7-5-3 months to me. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. My business plan has changed 3 times in Q4 alone. Now, again, I laugh and probably, make too big of a deal about it. But I think that that's really the takeaway is that the business decisions will be changed along your journey. And in order to continuously change your business thought process and not rest on your victories is an important thing to do.
I think a lot of people listening to this are thinking, well, he built it from the inside out and he builds it from the outside in. And they're probably trying to sort through what would I need to know or test before building internally or partnering externally, or maybe it's a hybrid of the two. How should companies think about which way to go about getting this capability?
So first off, internally, as you're looking, well, what is going to be my solution? Build from inside or take outside help. First thing, look at your part family fits. Look at what you're doing. Do you really have the solutioning opportunities in place that additive can bring? Really start from the ground level. Hey, we're excited about it. Hey, there's some thought around it, but make sure that you give enough rigor to that front end discussion and discovery around whether AM is going to be the solution that to bring into play, or even, I hate to just, lump it into the AM, production aspect of it, or even if it is that front end product development and, what's it going to do with us? What do we want to invest in? How it's going to help us? So that's the big one up front is to really look internally, look at what you're doing, educate yourself on additive manufacturing. I know from an internal aspect of it, I actually had to create an internal education program in order to stand it up internally. It wasn't just, sharing communications and trying to tell people, well, this is what it's all about, and doing PowerPoint, slides, here or there. I actually set up an education program internally to actually run the product development group, the product development engineers, designers, through the manufacturing engineers, had, education that was set up for the actual management, the junior management levels, to help them understand what additive manufacturing was in their terms. And then I even went so far as to say, here's an executive level education program that dealt, so they didn't have to learn what was going on inside the machines, but more along the lines of what was the decision making behind manufacturing going to mean to them. So it was really doing some actual education program. Now, maybe you say, well, we can't actually go that far as to set up an education program, but think about how you're educating your internal stakeholders and what that message is to each one of them. Are they going to be on the operational level? Are they going to be on the decision-making level? And what does it mean to them? And make sure they get educated in order to make decisions. And then I would also throw into that is to investigate and confirm the operational readiness that you have. Say, hey, if we get buy-in and if we get the checkoffs and everything, are we ready to do this? In many different aspects. Because if that is not the case, then you can say, hey, we're not really there yet on the back end of things, then you got to make sure you start working in that area as well. Because as soon as you get buy-in and as soon as you can turn the lights on above their head and they're going to say, yes, we want to do this, you need to be ready to transition to say, okay, here's the how we're going to do this. Because if you don't come with that, then you're going to destroy or eat away at the efficacy of the process that you just tried to sell and hopefully successfully have sold.
I think that's so powerful. It's not only how can I help my internal stakeholders understand the value in their terms, whether that's product development, junior management, or the executive team, but what you're doing is you're helping an organization translate among itself, among different departments. In your term of operational readiness, you're helping them translate from a why and a what into a how. And I think that's such a key takeaway for people trying to make this successful. I want to ask you maybe some even broader questions than where we've been talking so far. One of them is, what do you think the additive industry still talks about too much? And what does it not talk about enough?
Okay, wow. That's a good question. One thing that I think that we talk about too much are the 3D printers. We talk about the machines, okay, which is good. We have to talk about the machines. We have to talk about the new technology and why the technology works and everything that it goes along with that, and what are good systems and what are the next generations of systems, because it's very exciting and people are putting a lot of work and energy into that. But a lot of times, because that is that's the good tagline out there and everything, it becomes the item that's talked about too much. Because I think that we may see now in the additive manufacturing community where we're starting to wonder, well, why aren't we continuing on that great uptake curve that we were talking about? And there's been some players that have been involved with it, COVID, supply chain disruption, everything that's been gone, where, it's been both a boon and a bust, in the additive, community. And one of the reasons why I think that we've seen some stagnation is because we're just talking about the machines too much. And then obviously then the lead in is conversely is we're not talking about the people, and we're not talking about the cadences and everything that goes into it. There are good conversations that are starting to happen, skilling up. How companies are going to skill up for this. Some of the new positions that are just popping up to support the additive manufacturing community and its intake into the company's processes. We need to keep talking about those. We need to keep talking about governance over the system, everything that's, underneath the scenes and may not be flashy to talk about. Those are the important building blocks. Those are the foundations that additive is going to be built on moving forward. And we really need to start pushing those conversations to the forefront and say, hey, this is what we need. This is what we need to make the additive community strong and continue to build. The tech, I love them for it. I love the new tech that's coming out and the capabilities, and it's great. And I love what we can do and the fact that we're only scratching the surface, and it's just going to get better, and then we're going to get faster, and we're going to get better materials, and it's going to keep going. How do we help more of the manufacturing community as a whole transition to additive manufacturing and continue to proliferate that additive manufacturing across.
I could not agree more. We talk about the additive industry, companies. Those are people. They're just
Yeah.
people. In the change management, and the buy-in, and the structure, and the governance, and the how to think, not just what to think. Those are people conversations. And so I could not agree more, Paul, that I think that in general, anytime you're trying to adopt something new or adopt something different, it all comes back to people. I want to end on that note where you talked about what the additive community maybe doesn't talk enough about or talks too much about. Give us some advice on 5 years from now. What will separate the companies that have truly won with additive from the rest?
So I think if I were, to, give my vision of the future and where things are going and see what companies that are successful are going to be doing, I would believe it's going to be those adopters or those that are scaling up who make it a truly managed capability. From the front end all the way, to the back end. They're going to have orchestrated roles that are going to be involved within their organizations who are going to be focused on this and are going to be giving it their energy and 110%. It's going to be the companies who protect the learning and really do a little bit of investment in that so that the enterprise as a whole becomes intelligent about additive manufacturing and not just at the departmental level. So really, I think that's protecting that learning is going to be very important. And then it's those who get those documented processes in place and really, transitions their additive manufacturing applications into boring traditional manufacturing processes. When they've successfully done that and there's not as many issues and it just becomes that kind of day-to-day operations, when you get to that level of buy-in and process control and governance and everything, to say, okay, there's no more risk associated ahead of us. We have integrated, and now we are connected to the rest of our operations and the rest of the enterprise as a whole. You've managed it. You have success there. Now, that's not to say that there's not issues that ever come along, but I think that's really 5 years from now when I talk to someone and it's no longer a surprise to say, you're doing additive manufacturing. It's like, yep, we're doing additive manufacturing. To me, that it may be boring, but to me, that's what success sounds like.
I love it. I feel like there's been a learning a minute while we've been talking. It's been so great. And I so much appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all the lessons you've learned in ways that can be pretty immediately applied. So thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation today.
Thank you very much.
What a fantastic episode. Clearly, Paul is an expert at doing this.
Yes.
In many ways, more than one. I loved what he said about this. Yes, there's technology in the business. I mean, he brought up ROI a bunch of times, but a whole lot of this was organizational change management. What is your take on how all those fit together based on what he shared?
I think one of the first big takeaways for me is additive is an organizational change problem first. It's not a technology problem first. And a lot of these will sound like timeless principles, but we leave them at the door when we start to implement 3D printing. Some of the key things underneath that I just loved is he talked about this critical role as a translator. I think companies understand I may need to translate from an engineer in product development to manufacturing, or I may need to translate from a technical level up to my boss who is thinking about financial constraints. But what they miss is this is 360. It is not linear. And something he did that I haven't seen anyone formalize in quite that way is this idea of an educational program. And I don't just put my engineers through it to understand how to design for additive or my manufacturing team. I put junior managers through it and I put the executive team through it. So to his point, we can go from something that's bold and exciting to boring, and then we know it's working. Paul built this playbook, I'll call it, internally from the ground up. And while there were so many good nuggets, one of the biggest ones that I don't want to lose when he transferred from Crown equipment over to Ricoh is not just what capabilities do I need, but what should I build internally versus what should I partner with someone to do? And that can get lost, I think, as technical people, of which we all are based on the industry we're in. We think, I want to do everything myself. But your best use of time, talent, and treasure needs to be what only you are good at organizationally. Everything else, partner with, because you're going to get the results you want at a much better payback. And we hear that all the time. We'll have guests on this podcast that talk about it. We talk to customers about it, is helping them understand what is the highest use of my time, and can you help me with the rest?
Tougher when you're in a large organization. And I think when an organization, you just have to be careful, because if you lack a little discipline around that, or if the room is unbalanced, he spent a lot of time talking about understanding what each stakeholder is looking for and being intelligent about who should be in the room when we make this decision. My experience is, and I've seen this happen in dental, I've seen this happen in traditional manufacturing, company that we're currently working with, have been for some time, who wanted to move the capability from prototyping, R&D into production. They had success with it when a bunch of their engineers ran it.
Mm-hmm.
When they tried to transition it to being owned by manufacturing, much lower level of success, which led them to say, hey, B9, rather than me have 10 of my top engineers running manufacturing equipment, which is what this had become, can you guys do this for me? How do you think, based on Paul's commentary and the other customers we've interacted with, how do you get people to understand that this change management thing, it isn't one step and done? This has to span all the parts of the organization that are affected. How do you do that?
He used a great term called portfolio of ROI. At each stage, you're going to have to redo that cycle. Think through your business case, think through your people capabilities, think through your business outcomes that you want to achieve. That same people, technology, business, you ask that every step of the way. Don't do that once. That commitment you're talking about, ask that question every single time. There are still things, this company we're talking about, that they will always do internally in product development. It makes sense. You're going to have the same exact team, and the answer is going to be fundamentally different when you're trying to now address, should I do this for production?
Well, what a fantastic,
Yes.
just a pile of golden nuggets from Paul. I feel like we're hitting the mark in terms of bringing you guys stories from people who are doing this successfully. Any final notes as we wrap up?
I would say if you want the Cliff Notes version of what Sean and I just talked about, go to the show notes. We have them in bullet points. It's easy to digest, easy to share. And if you're sitting here thinking, oh, I knew all that, but applying it is actually the hard part, could not agree more. And if you want to talk to us about how to bring that to life in your organization, we're happy to have that conversation. You can reach out at b9c.com/additive advantage.
You can also follow us on Apple or Spotify podcasts, or you can watch this episode on YouTube at the Additive Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple or rate us 5 stars on Spotify. It helps us reach more listeners. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on new episodes. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.